But let us all direct, since they are going to read outside the land of Israel, they will read the parasha of Massei, which comes immediately after the parasha of Matot. They will read them both. We in Israel, we will read only Massei because we already read Matot. So let us say a few words about the parasha of Massei. The parasha of Massei means journeys. The journeys of the people of Israel when they were redeemed and liberated from their slavery in Egypt. They spent 40 years in the wilderness, but they didn't stay in one place. In fact, their journeys counted to be 42. And the Torah tells us the names of those places where they stationed. Sometimes they stayed in one single place in the wilderness. They stayed one whole year. And sometimes they stayed just 12 hours, going from one place to another. That's how they spent 40 years. And the Torah tells us the details. ויסעו בני ישראל מרעמסס ויחנו בסוכות. They departed from Ramesses, which was still in the country of Egypt, and now finally they landed. They camped in Sukkot. Then they departed from Sukkot. They went to Etam, that is the limit of the wilderness, and then they departed from. They left Etam, and they were circling around the Hirot, and all kinds of names that we don't know their origin, which testifies to the fact that the Torah is a story of secrets and mysteries. Unbelievable. All kinds of names. Mara, Elima, every place there was something else, going from one place to another. And all this was in the wilderness. And by the way, that does not mean that they camped in places which was populated by other nations. No, we believe, according to the commentators and our sages, we believe that they were all the time in places like the Torah testifies to the fact that there was no water, there was all you found is snakes, poisonous snakes, and terrible heat. How did they exist for 4 years? We're talking about millions of people. Millions of people. Some say 3 million, some say 6 million people. We opt by 6 million people, with their families, children and old people and everyone, and together with the people who joined them also coming out of Egypt, those that we call Erev Rav. Altogether there were 6 million people. 6 million people without food, without water. How is it possible? Of course, God furnished them with everything that they needed. The Torah says, for example, Simlatecha lo baleta me'alecha, veraglecha lo batseka. You know, usually when you go in the wilderness, in the desert, it's very hot. The first casualty is your legs. But nothing happened. Their legs remained healthy and everything. What about their vestments? They're worn out. It's in no time, because of the intemperies and the climate, the first thing that rots away is what you wear. The dresses and things and customs. And people came out from Egypt with whatever they had, but it stayed the same. Simlatecha lo baleta. Their robes remained the same. That's another miracle. But the biggest miracle of all is food. How did they exist without food? There is no food in the desert. But God provided them with the most delicious food. The manna came down from heaven every day except Shabbat. And they collected the manna. And they tasted. Our sages said that they had all kinds of taste, depending on their faith. Otherwise, if they don't have faith, they will collect like a little cake that it's enough. After a while you get enough of it. But those people who had good faith, if they wanted to taste meat, they tasted meat in that kind of substance that fell from heaven, the manna. And that's how they existed and subsisted all these years in heaven. What about water? Our sages said that there was a well of water. It's known as the well of Miriam that went together with them. Unbelievable. But above all those 42 stations and camps where they went from one place to another, all the time in the desert for 4 years. Why? Why is it? We know why. Because when, as you know, as we read in Parashat Shelach Lecha, there were those who went to spy out the land of Israel, came back to the people of Israel with a bad report. And that cost the people who believed in them, all the people in the Israelites that came out from Egypt, except a few individuals, such as Yoshua bin Nun and Caleb bin Yefuneh, all of them, they had to die in the desert. So they spent as many years as needed in the desert. Before they entered, the people of Israel, only the new generation was allowed to enter the land of Israel. And because they, instead of saying good about the land of Israel, as promised by God Himself, they were, they were not so sure about it. They started to have all kinds of lamentations about it. So much that the night when Vayivku ha'am b'layla ha'u, the people of Israel, when they heard the report of those bad 10 spies that went to spy out the land of Israel and came back with a kind of report that brought tremendous fear in the hearts of the Jewish people, they believed in them and they cried. That night was the night of the 9th of Av. And lo and behold, that night, our sages said that God said to them, you have cried, you shall cry always on that night. And that night was the 9th of Av, in that month in which we lost the first temple, the second temple, and hopefully, as promised by the great ones, that this day will become finally a day of tremendous consolation for the Jewish people. On that day also there will be the redemption of the Jewish people, or the beginning of the redemption, or the end of the redemption. Whatever it is, that the fact that they spent 40 years in the desert, going from one place to another, is telling us also about the future of the Jewish people. I mean, after the destruction of the first temple in the year 586 before the Common Era, and then 70 years later they built the second Bet HaMikdash after given the permission of Koresh, the king of Persia. And then it lasted for another 420 years, and then it was destroyed again. When? On the 9th of Av. All this happened because the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, after they saw so many miracles, and yet they were still very stubborn. As soon as something happens, they immediately, they were complaining all the time. That caused them the fact that they could not enter the land of Israel. The Ktav Sofer, one of the great commentators of the last century, he said that that's the reason why they had to spend 4 years in the desert and could not enter the land of Israel except for the new generation that was born in the desert. He said that the reason is because even when they were about to leave Mitzrayim, Egypt, they did not leave with enthusiasm. Because, I mean, we could look at it in a natural way, we could understand. I mean, even though they were slaves in Egypt, but they still remembered from time to time that there were some good times in Egypt. זכרנו את הדגה אשר נאכל במצרים חינם. We remember the good fish that we ate in Egypt for free, and so forth, all kinds of things that are difficult for us to understand. After you see so many miracles, how come you still have doubts about the behavior of God? But, I mean, look at it upon this way. Like, for example, even though they saw great miracles before, yet when they stood before the sea, and the army of Egypt is coming for the purpose to massacre them. And before them is the ocean. What are they supposed to think? Of course, they were righteous people, and those righteous people believed that God is going to save them. But most of the people were still with the mind of slaves. How much can be expected from them? The same thing also, we can judge them why they were afraid to go to the land of Israel. But another thing the Ktav Sofer says, that the reason why they could not go to the land of Israel is because when they left Egypt, they left hesitantly. And it's also natural and very easy to understand, knowing that they are going into knowing that they are going oh please knowing that they are going into the desert. What else do you expect from them? They are leaving Egypt, yes, but they are going into a furnace, and they don't know what's going to be there. So they were not very much enthusiastic. Of course, they were always the righteous people who believed blindly in Moshe and God. But most of the populace there were afraid. Wouldn't you be the same way? Of course, we are easy to judge them. But at the same time, also, the hand of God was quite harsh with them because of this, what they saw. And yet they remained stubborn. So that's why every time they sinned, there was a calamity coming, like we read in the Parashat of Balak and Pinchas. And if it was not for Pinchas, there would have been a total destruction. And we keep asking questions, why is it that the hand of God is so harsh with them? Today, we live in a generation in which so many abominations are being committed, and yet it appears that nothing is happening. Of course, everything is happening if all you have to do is to ponder upon what's happening in the world. But at the same time, people are very vague when it comes to that. So they think nothing is happening. So some people are secular enough to say there is no God, God forbid. Some people have doubts about God. Some people are afraid. And only the very, very loyal and very faithful have the emunah and the faith in God. So anyway, so let us say, those 42 journeys of the people of Israel that we will read in Parashat Massei represent the journeys of Israel throughout all the generations. I mean, let's ponder upon the history of the Jewish people. Is journeying from one place to another. I mean, we were exiled the first time, the second time. Number one, we came out from Egypt after hundreds of years in slavery. That's the first galut, the first exile. Then we came out from Egypt, Baruch Hashem, and we went to the land of Israel, of course, after so many things that happened. But then, thinking up to the time of King David and King Solomon, the Jewish people did not even think that they would go anywhere but to stay in the land of Israel. And then came the time of the destruction of the temple, and the Jewish people were exiled to Babylon. The time of Nebuchadnezzar, and then Sancherib separated us from the 10 tribes, and the 10 tribes have disappeared from us, even though we believe that they are still in existence in the world and they will come back to us, but in the meantime they went from one place to another. And then the second big exile after the destruction of the second temple, right? And that it's already close to 2,000 years that the Jewish people is going from one place to another. I mean, when they finally, 1,000 years ago and more, when they went to Spain, that was a great place for the Jewish people, where they benefited a lot from the country, and also they benefited the people of the country there. And yet the time came, the time of the Inquisition and the time of their exile from Spain. And again, they had to go from one place to another. Those who went to Turkey, those who went to Morocco, those who went to Poland and Russia. And that's how we are made up. People who most of the life of the Jewish people we spent in exile. Now, thank God, we are back in the land of Israel. But you see, there is only one more word. The question is, why so many? Why is it that people, in the time of the wilderness, the Jewish people had to suffer so much before they entered the land of Israel? There is an explanation. One of the explanations is, our sages said in the Talmud, in Masechet Berachot on page 5, that Eretz Israel niknet beisurim. To make an acquisition of the land of Israel, you have to suffer first. But the question remains, why do we have to suffer? Today, not much suffering, but still people have to leave behind everything that they have and all the comfort that they had in order to come to the land of Israel. Even today, when, thank God, we cannot even equate it with the past generations, when people practically jeopardize their life to come to the land of Israel. So why it has to be so difficult? Well, there is a psychological reason behind it. The more you suffer for something, the more you love that for which you suffered. The land of Israel requires also not only to acquire it, but also to love it. Because if you don't like it, if you don't love it, you are going to find only things that are not lovable in the land of Israel. There are many things that we don't like in the land of Israel. Sometimes the mentality of people is different, but you have to get used to love it. When you love it, you are going to find out how sweet it is and how great it is. The Jew in Israel is more aggressive. It is true. He is more aggressive. But if you know with patience and moderation, you know how to analyze him, you will find out that he's sweeter than the Jew outside the land of Israel. I'm sorry to have to say it. I spent 45 years in America, in New York, and I am fond of my people in New York, and I love them very much, and I am full of appreciation and gratefulness to the land of America, the blessed land. God blesses this land of kindness and generosity. But at the same time, our obligation is to be in the land of Israel. The land of Israel, we suffered so much for it. And still, some nations, our enemies, still pretend that it's not ours. How is it possible to think it's not ours? We have prayed for it for more than 2,000 years. Every day, 3 times a day, we keep saying, please God, let us return to the land of Israel. Come back to the land of Israel. Let us build the sanctuary again, the temple, and let us have the Mashiach and so forth. How many times have we prayed? If someone prays for something again and again, it means it's his. No one can take the land of Israel from our hands. It's impossible. It's the land of God. And it's the land that was given solely to the people of Israel. And the people of Israel will end up coming back to the land of Israel. I will tell you something that perhaps I said many times. Napoleon, the great king, the great leader of France, he conquered a very big part of the world, right? In the years 1800. So one day he arrived to the shores of the land of Israel with his ships and everything. But it happened that he arrived on the 9th of Av, when the Jewish people go to the synagogue, sit down on the floor and cry over the destruction of the temple. Of course, he expected the Jews to come and welcome him. But nothing of the kind has happened. Those who are usually by nature our enemies, they came to Napoleon and they said, you see, the Jews are not good. They didn't come to welcome you. He said, no, he was a very smart king, Napoleon. He said, no, I don't believe so. Go and investigate why they didn't come. So when he said his emissaries, they found out that the people of Israel are sitting and mourning for the temple. They came back to Napoleon and they said to him, Majesty, they couldn't come to you because they are mourning. He said, mourning for what? Crying for what? Well, they cry because they lost the temple, their temple. When did it happen? 1800 years ago, in the time of Napoleon. He said, what? You mean to tell me that 1800 years they keep crying every year on that day for what they lost. Unbelievable. Then I tell you something. These people will see in the future again what they lost will come back to them. Let me conclude by saying the following. In the Holy Zohar it says that the temple of the Jewish people was never destroyed. So what happened? I mean, we saw the destruction and terrible tragedy that happened again and again in the land of Israel, in Jerusalem. So what happened? The Zohar says it was never destroyed. And the Zohar says, you want to know why it was never destroyed? Because the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was there. It's impossible to destroy the temple when the Shekhinah is there, when the divine presence is there. So what did God do? He took the temple to heaven. And instead, he put there an image. Of course, when God does it, it looks extremely concrete for people like us. So it appeared that the temple was destroyed. But the temple of God was not destroyed. It's still there, and it will come back the third time. And this time when it will come back, it will never be destroyed anymore. Now, it says that 3 exiles the Jewish people will endure. The first one was in Egypt, second one after the destruction of the first temple, and the third one after the destruction of the second temple. No more. After 2,000 years, now that we have come back to the land of Israel, no more exile. No matter how much our enemies will strive to take it away from us and to fight us, little by little, we will see the end of all this. When the nations will all finally recognize that fact, that the land of Israel is ours, that the blessing of the world will be depend entirely on that. And most of the enemies will come back and apologize for what they have done to us and will make peace with us. Of course, those who will remain, even among the Jewish people, who knows what will happen? Because before the coming of the Mashiach, we know that things are going to happen. And who knows? Mi yamutu mi yichyeh, who is going to die, who will live. Hopefully, the Jewish people suffered enough. I mean, we all know the history of the Jewish people is replete with tragedies. So how much more can God take from us? But again, there's a lot of secularism. And even among the religious people, there is much to do to change. But hopefully we are reaching that point in which the final redemption will arrive. And we hope and pray that we will all be here when it will happen, close to us in our days. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.